at $80 even, up a few pennies overnight. It did close yesterday at that sort of ever so slightly below below $80 a barrel, and so it has just popped its head above that $80 level this morning, closing last night at 79.98, as close as you can get without being 80. Let's kick off this morning with Robin Mills, the CEO of Kamar Energy. Robin, there's a lot happening this week, obviously, here in Dubai, UAE's COP28, everything, but there is another show on the road. OPEC Plus postponed its meeting last weekend. Your thoughts on the why of that, and what is the outlook for the meeting decision this week, which is virtual and I believe due to take place on Thursday? Will it be a kind of 5-minute virtual call? Your thoughts on all things OPEC Plus?
Well, OPEC trying to crash the COP party and putting their meeting back.
I would suspect that's the last thing Abu Dhabi or UAE would want, but
yeah, they would have preferred to have this wrapped up before COP, but it exactly coincides with the opening. But never mind. I mean, that's where we are. But obviously, showing this is a much more contentious OPEC meeting than the last few. The challenge obviously that emerges is the oversupply, growing production from some members, relatively concerns over demand, and particularly concerns over demand going into next year. And I think Saudi Arabia's fatigue with its own voluntary cuts, and its feeling that others have to put their oar in a bit. It's had the supported by the voluntary cuts by Russia, but Russia's not been kind of fully complying with those. A bit less compliance by some other members of the group, Iraq in particular, but then also members outside the group, or members who are not cutting, and the gains in Iran in particular. And so I think Saudi feeling that we made the voluntary cuts, and we're going to have to continue those into next year, and therefore it's time for somebody else to support this as well, and looking for some adjustment by all members probably, and the African members resisting. A little bit of a sideshow in a way, but I think Saudi's just taking this principle that no free riders, even if you're small, you have to come up with some kind of a cut and show some kind of a commitment to the cause.
Narendra Taneja, India's leading energy expert. Narendra, your thoughts? Obviously, India should be quite happy, I would suspect, with $80 on Brent. Does this oil price tell you that the market's expecting OPEC to roll over, or has it baked in already maybe even deeper cuts? Your thoughts on the expectations on what OPEC Plus should be considering when they meet this week?
Well, good question. You see, $80, of course, is a good news for India, because the $80 is something that Indian economy can absorb without any hard efforts, and continue to grow at the same pace that it has been growing the last 6-7 months, or close to a year now. And this next year being election year, so $80 would kind of bear well in terms of political calculations as well. But that said, at the same time, we know that OPEC in particular is trying very hard. Saudi Arabia wants oil at $90 per barrel. We know that Angola, has a different idea. Nigeria has a different idea. But the Gulf countries, particularly Saudi Arabia, they're not happy with $80. They want $90 per barrel. But the fact is that the prices have moved southward despite the cuts. And for OPEC is a cartel, and production cut is the main weapon they have in their hand. And they've tried it. It has not really produced the right results, unless kind of we see some kind of strength in terms of demand. I don't know how effective it's going to be unless they go for some drastic cut, like 2 million barrels or 3 million barrels. But if it is like 500,000 or 1 million barrels, I don't think it's going to make any difference, unless, of course, you see some more positive, movement in terms of demand going up. Supply side is very comfortable. Iranian oil is now flowing, and America is not that tough as it used to be on Iranian oil. Angola and Venezuela oil is moving, gaining strength. And the same goes for the Russian oil. Despite all these stories that we see, Russian oil is, giving the kind of comfort that the global supply system needs in terms of crude oil. So that said, at the same time, even if they go for a production cut, if it's symbolic, like 500,000, 700,000 barrels, then I don't think it's going to make any difference. and India, countries like India are not worried about it. But it is something more than that. If it's 2 million barrels, then the point is, and it's still if the prices move southward, then OPEC is going to lose face. So and it would also be kind of there's something seriously wrong within OPEC. So I think there are many questions, but as far as my own sense is, supply side is very comfortable, and demand side we don't see any dramatic growth. So therefore, whatever they may try, but I think prices are going to stay in the region of $80 per barrel, unless of course there is some major geopolitical trigger.
Let's welcome Omar Al-Ubaidli, Director of Research, Bahrain Center for Strategic International Energy Studies. The perfect segue, geopolitics. Omar, what do you think is the geopolitics at play here for Saudi Arabia in this decision? We've seen in recent days and weeks sort of a reawakening of U.S. noise about Iranian sanctions being enforced. We've seen some, in the aftermath of that, some ship action, a drone attacking a ship apparently in the Indian Ocean, another one hijacked. Are these all related? What are your thoughts on the geopolitics of this moment?
Well, I think what we've been seeing over the last year, predictably, is as negotiations regarding the nuclear deal continue to stall and stop and start and whatever, Iran continuously demonstrating to rival powers in the region and to outside the region that it has significant power that is not accounted for, and that it deserves a bigger slice of the pie than it feels it's getting at the moment. And that manifests itself in the activities of various proxies and various attacks and marine routes and drones and so on and so forth. So this is very much a continuation of that trend, and because for the time being,
but one of those trends has been an embrace between Riyadh and Tehran. We saw in the recent Islamic conferences in Riyadh, the president of Iran attended. Hand in hand, they walked in the room.
Yeah, so because Iran had successfully demonstrated its rising strength, Saudi Arabia took the correct decision of striking a deal with Iran before US struck a deal with Iran, because if Saudi Arabia went to Iran after the US struck a deal with it, then it would have been in a much weaker position. So, and since then, given that deal or that overture has been made by Saudi Arabia, it's definitely in Iran's interest to continue reciprocating that as an additional way of exerting pressure on America, especially at a time when, on an issue such as the Israeli-Gaza conflict, the US and Saudi positions are not perfectly aligned. So this is all very much flowing in the way that satisfies Iranian interests. And US, unfortunately, continues to suffer from having an incoherent Middle East policy and from having its foreign policy and military resources divided across three different fields, which are, Eastern Europe, Middle East, and East Asia, in a manner that is not embedded in a holistic strategic plan. It's very reactive and haphazard. And as a consequence, anyone looking to, expand their influence in the Middle East, who has the resources, this is the right time.
Robin, just coming back to the moment that OPEC Plus faces, I think regardless of the sort of whatever dramas made this meeting postponed, this was always going to be a difficult moment in the terms of moving into the new year, a reconfiguration of quotas at a time when we're in a weakening market. Never a good time for quotas to be adjusted when the supply or when the demand needle is declining rather than rising. Just looking at that dynamic, regardless of the impact for the market, your thoughts on this as a moment to get the quotas into a sensible space where your quota reflects your capacity and not some fantasy, and UAE obviously with agreement to have a bigger quota. Where do you think quotas go in this moment?
Yeah, and look, I think OPEC had hoped to be in a better place when this quarter came around, and the forecasts generally were that the fourth quarter would be quite a strong one, and then OPEC would come into the new year with a chance even to think about cutting back its reductions and realign quotas in a stronger market, as you say. But it hasn't turned out like that. So, but there is one advantage, I think, to realigning quotas in a weaker market, which is that people are a bit more scared. People are suffering, so there's a bit more of a stick. And the stick is that Saudi can say, well, our voluntary cuts, they're voluntary and they don't last forever. And if we don't agree, then those voluntary cuts can go away. Now, that I think, was precisely the reason for making the voluntary cuts and having this stick to wield over the others if they were being uncooperative. Yeah, so that's it. I mean, the realignment of quotas is essential. The African members, as you say, their quotas, which were set back in 2020 and not, hardly adjusted since, that they are kind of fantasy, and indeed those African members have not been able to produce up to those levels. That said, Nigerian production has been quite a bit stronger recently. That's one of the reasons for the weaker price. So the Nigerians will feel like they have a bit of a case to hold on to their quota, or and we understand that they and the other African members have been pushing back on this independent assessment of their production levels or their capacity levels. And in Nigeria's case, I can see it a bit because Nigeria's case is a lot of it is political. So Nigeria can always say, well, if the politics and the security situation sorts itself out, we can produce this much. There isn't anything technically stopping us. It's not like, say, Angola, where actually the production can't get up to those levels at all anyway. The UAE, I think, is an interesting case because the UAE clearly has a lot more capacity. That ADNOC reported 4.5 million barrels per day capacity quite recently, and is of course pushing towards 5, as we know. Current production is far below that, so I think the UAE will definitely feel, look, we had a deal on an increasing quota, and we've borne a bigger burden percentage-wise of cuts than anybody. Now is the time for us to see at least a little bit of return on that.
And just to follow up on that, Robert, how do you think the market is baking in this current decision? Is this going to be a sell on the news rollover, or a buy? What's your sense of where the market's baking in this decision?
Well, the market's obviously fallen quite a bit on the postponement, and I think part of the fear there. Okay, so I think previously everybody was thinking it'll be a rollover, not much more action than that. The postponement creates a worry that indeed Saudi would go back on its voluntary cuts or part of them, and that brings prices down. I think if we have a deal now and a rollover, much as we are, if we have a deal with some deeper cuts, that's kind of mildly positive. I mean, as Narendra says, if it's 500,000 barrel a day cuts, that's not dramatic. Probably mildly positive at best, I would say.
Narendra, we are on the eve of COP28, and one of the headlines in our news digest today from a recent Financial Times article, that India looking to triple its underground coal mining production. Not quite the headline one would want to see going into this climate conference. Your thoughts and expectations of where India sees the climate story now, and the sort of carbon management, the carbon reduction objective, and India's role and position in that.
Well, to be honest, I mean, India has no option but to follow the middle path. In the sense, on the one side, India has to be with the world, and not because we have signed all the global treaties, but also because we are a densely populated country, and climate is a serious challenge. We can see it all around us every day. So we are with the world. We are on the same page. But where, for instance, we have some disagreement is the way forward, how to get there in terms of climate security, because we have to balance it with energy security. And coal is the only alternative we have, that's kind of domestic resource, a big domestic resource that kind of gives us energy security that we need, because for oil, gas, uranium, solar power equipment, cells, we are heavily dependent on imports. So therefore, coal is the only, energy available to us to make sure that, our dependence can be reduced in time to come on other sources of energy. So coal for us is like very, very important, is the kind of the backbone of India's energy security. So no compromises there. Close to 70% electricity is generated using coal, mostly domestic coal. So I think that's important for the world to understand. An economy like India, a kind of neighbors we have, especially in the northern part, on the northern side, we cannot compromise with our security. So, but at the same time, we see that when it comes to COP28 and COP Summit and all that, I think it's all interesting. I mean, it's nice to see United Arab Emirates playing a very good host. Being an Arab country, they know how to be a good host. But that said, at the same time, I think when you look at the narratives which are coming around, the narratives which is basically the global north is trying to build in terms of, phasing out or phasing down fossil fuels. I think that's going to be a tough one because UAE may try to kind of strike the right balance, but the fact remains the world needs oil and gas and coal for very, very long time to come. But when you look at the kind of pressures being built and the narratives being built, narratives being disseminated all around the world, these are all coming from the global north, with all due respect. So the fact is that if the COP is kind of more inclusive, is more honest and transparent, and at the same time takes care interest of all parts of the world, including global south, and I think then they'll be able to make some headway. But what we have seen so far, we saw that in Sharm el-Sheikh, we saw that in Glasgow, we saw that in Paris. If you're keeping fossil fuel boys and girls out of the room, which they did in Glasgow, to some extent also, there was some change, but in Sharm el-Sheikh story was the same. But here, so United Arab Emirates, known for oil, is hosting it. But even they are striking the right balance. But my sense is, unless they go for honest conversation, transparent conversation, understand the need of these 6.7 billion people in the global south, and understand that all countries are not Germany, all countries are not Norway or the United States. They need oil, they need gas, they need coal also for some time. We know about new technology, but new technology are beyond the purse or majority of countries of the global south. So unless all these factors, things are factored in, I think COP28 will be a great event, I'm sure, because UAE is a great host. But in terms of results and its future results and the future scope and all things, I think there will be many questions. But my sense is, I followed COP very, very closely from the very beginning. My sense is, it's time now to actually press the reboot button. Also, COPs need to be reimagined if we are really serious in taking COPs as a kind of central or the focal point in terms of global climate security.
Yeah, it's certainly.
Unless they are willing to do it, we will have a great COP, but very, very little and very, very poor results.
And worth noting that it is COP28, so it's the 28th edition of trying to manage this very fast-growing problem. Omar, I wanted to just segue also into the other big story that's this week and coming back on our screens, sadly, the ceasefire in Gaza. That it's not a ceasefire as a term technically. I think they're calling it a pause of some horrific name like that. Your thoughts on the outlook for that as this in the coming days? It's been apparently extended for 2 days. Where does it go from here? How big an event does it continue to be for the region and sort of be a threat to the stability of the region?
So I think that the threat to the region in terms of other people getting involved willingly is relatively low, because if the three primary potential entrants would have been Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran. And if any of the three were to want to get involved, then the ideal time to get involved strategically would have been on day one, when Israel was not mobilized and ready to respond. And so the longer we go without them getting involved, the less likely it is they would get involved. So that certainly limits the likelihood of a regional escalation. However, it still remains a background chance of a regional escalation because of errors, because something going wrong, somebody accidentally targeting something, somebody misunderstanding something, and then you have to get into a to and fro where everybody sort of reasserts their deterrent. And we've seen that happen in world history many a time. So there's still a background risk, but I would say it is diminished.
Regardless of the scale, I mean, it seems clear to me that this is a Nakba. This is a clearance objective here. They've got the top half of Gaza in the first month. They're probably going to squeeze the second half in the second month or two. Does that never end up becoming a regional problem?
It's, first of all, I mean, if we take the Israeli government and the US governments at face value, they've both said they're not. Israel said it's not going to occupy Gaza, and seems to have grudgingly conceded that it can't force the residents of Gaza out. And the US has delivered apparently a strong message saying that they will not accept the displacements of the residents of Gaza or an occupation. Now we have to take into account the fact that the high likelihood,
whatever all of that means, I have no idea. But
Well, I think that. I mean, first of
I
all,
mean, facts
regardless
on
of,
the ground are there's 1.5 million people without a house and winter's coming and they've no education and no healthcare. How do you stay in Gaza under those terms? I mean, it just seems to me this is not a status quo equation here. Status quo is things get really bad. And the question then becomes, is there any consequence of really bad?
So I think that what we're going to see, first of all, is clarity from the Israelis on when they're going to suspend their military operations. For the time being, when we're talking about the current negotiations, they keep signaling they haven't, but I think that's probably posturing. Then we have to contend with the fact that when the military operation stops, then probably Netanyahu will be removed from the Israeli government, and then we have to wait for a new Israeli government to form to see exactly what the Israelis are planning for. But I do think that I agree with you that it's not sustainable at all. And I think there is a realization on all sides that it's not sustainable, which is why there will be an impetus. And I think unlike previous conflicts in Gaza, the international pressure on Israel to provide a more sustainable environment for the residents of Gaza is high and rising, which will force Israel's hand sooner or later. I don't think what we're seeing is sustainable, but I also don't think that the proposition of an occupation is plausible either. But we have to see what the Israeli government really, it's the primary actor in this. We have to see a clear message from it regarding its own military goals and its post-military goals. Until we get that, we're just going to see more suffering.
But no ramifications regionally, ultimately, is what you're saying.
I don't think so, because I think Jordan and Israel and Egypt have made it very clear they're not going to accept, a flow of displaced Palestinians. So they're going to stay in Gaza, and if they stay in Gaza and then they start suffering even higher death rates from starvation, exposure, and all the things you'd expect, as the tension rises, then that's going to create more pressure on Israel, and it will have basically painted itself into a corner. And we'll see how its government decides to respond to that. But I don't think we're going to see a forced expulsion. I don't think that's a plausible, even the Israelis.
But I think, ultimately, I think 1 and 1 ends up being 2. If you have 1.5 million people without a house, healthcare, or food or education, 1 and 1 is 2 here. I mean, you can't leave 1.5 million people in a bombed out building that's collapsed on the ground. I mean, it just the facts are not what they will be. It seems to me the facts are already clear. It's about what we do, what one does with that. I don't think it's speculation anymore. There is 1.5 million people more or less homeless. Anyway, this I think cannot be ignored as a potential disruptor still to come once Israel restarts its military machine later this week. Let's go to the survey question and see where it goes in terms of what the expectation of this small little room is. Has oil price baked in an OPEC plus rollover of current status quo or deeper cuts? The current oil price, $80 on Brent, seems to be stuck there more or less, give or take, moves a little bit here and this way. But ultimately, what has this oil market baked into? We've had a downward draft in the oil market, it seems to me, for many months, propped up by as I call it, the pole in the tent of the Saudi 1 million barrel a day voluntary cuts, June right through till now. The downward draft seems to be the most dominant one, except for that pole, that 1 million voluntary pole. But what is this oil price baked in? An OPEC rollover or deeper cuts at $80 Brent? Place your bets. Is it a rollover or deeper cuts? Robin, you've been very active in your role with your clients, etc., and very involved in the regional hydrogen story, all things COP, for a number of years now, since the COP show was coming this direction. Your thoughts on the eve of COP28? Should expectations be? What are the expectations? What are your expectations? Narendra's in his earlier comments indicating it's time to sort of, get off the pot, or whatever the saying is, get something moving. Your thoughts on expectations here, with, a lot of the sort of most immediate expectation that with a sort of hydrocarbon producing country hosting this event, There's been a call to action by the president-elect as a hydrocarbon producing country to other hydrocarbon producing companies and countries. Should he expect a response? Is he getting one? Your thoughts and expectations?
I think at the moment there's some, disappointment. I think that Dr. Rajab is kind of saying and doing all the right things. I think people, certain people were hoping that this would be a kind of transparently pro-oil COP and with an aim to reach no agreement. And Dr. Rajab was out there and saying, no, we absolutely have to accept that fossil fuel demand is going to decline, and we have to target emissions, and being very strong on stressing the links with developing countries. They need to take their interests fully into account. They need to mobilize finance. Many positive things. There's a certain amount of negative media attention in the West, and I think it's kind of struggling really to say what exactly he's done that is so bad. Now the proof's in the pudding, obviously. So let's see what comes out of COP. I think what comes out of COP, is there's a declaration at the end of it, and quite likely that will be disappointing to many, because it usually is. You're trying to get 180 countries to agree on something. Inevitably the result's going to be a lot weaker than the most ambitious members would want. But I kind of see those as more, highly symbolic, but not actually too practical. I think what's key to me is to see movement on all of these key issues, like mobilizing the funding for developing countries. That's absolutely essential. The amount of funding going to renewable energy in Africa is falling, not rising, and that's I think we all agree that's completely the wrong way, whether you're looking at the climate or whether you're looking at economic development and energy access. The mobilization of carbon trading through the so-called Article 6 in the Paris Agreement, getting that up and running, that could release a lot of money for things like that currently don't get enough funding. Carbon capture and storage is a big one. Everybody, I think particularly in the West, likes to bash carbon capture and storage. All the major energy bodies agree that it's extremely important and has to scale up hugely. So how do we actually get it moving? That's a key issue. A deal on methane, that's another one that the US is very much pushing. For me, that's an absolute low-hanging fruit. If we can't get there, then I really would be very disappointed. So there's a few kind of these key issues. I think these subsidiary topics, subsidiary but very important. We want to see some real practical action and movement on those.
Narendra, last comment to you. I wanted to get your views on all things China. China continues to struggle in its post-COVID. We saw most of the world economies coming out of COVID with a big bounce. India and probably the best in the class, and still having a soaring journey. China hasn't had that. I'm wondering your thoughts on the outlook for China and what it means for the rest of Asia. Does it have any consequence for India that China's economy doesn't rise again in the way that we were expecting, and for the rest of Asia?
Well, very good question. You see, my sense, and I'm not the only one, sense is that the Chinese government is, they have basically taken a step back, and in order to kind of reclaim the political agenda, which is basically the Chinese Communist Party, the priority of the top leadership, including the president, is basically to make Chinese Communist Party Marxist once again. Because the sense is they lost the way, and it became kind of capitalism has taken over. The Chinese version of capitalism basically had become, top priority for even for the Communist Party. But I think the president wants to take it back, and they want basically Marxism to come first and capitalism later. So it's a major transition which is going on. And when you go for such a massive transition in a large, huge, massive, complex country like China, it takes some time. So I think what you're seeing out of China in terms of economic developments are basically the manifestation of that. China is taking politically, steps back, and therefore the economy has to follow politics. So and I think that will continue, because the agenda of the president is to consolidate the Communist Party so that the Communist Party can continue to rule uninterrupted for next 100 years. Well, who knows? But that seems to be the agenda. So if that is the agenda, economy in the process is going to suffer, especially the private part of the Chinese economy, which is huge, as you know. So I think, therefore, for next 3-4 years, this will continue, because economy doesn't seem to be the priority of the top leadership. is the politics and basically re-Marxization of the Communist Party of China. That's a huge, massive agenda. And I think probably, we have to understand it. So therefore, in India, we are not too worried about it. As long as China is politically stable, it works for us. But and it actually goes to the advantage of India, because foreign investors in particular, they will have to look for kind of China plus. And when they look at China plus, countries like India, Indonesia, Vietnam are the obvious destinations. But that said, at the same time, it is having its own impact on politics in Central Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, and practically everywhere. And therefore, we see that it will have also impact on the climate summit in Dubai now, because when China is kind of in a way recasting many things, especially politics, domestic, and whatever happens domestic will have its kind of external dimension. So I think what we're going to see in terms of China next 10 years, extremely interesting. There is a bit of risk involved, because when you try to change the engine at the height of 40,000 feet of a jet aircraft, there is always a risk. But that's what Chinese leadership is trying to do.
Yes, 40,000 feet, changing the tires on the car. Omar, last word to you with the survey result. I wanted to get your thoughts. Rollover is the 2-to-1, 3-to-1 on this room. We'll post that on. It's baked in a rollover, so if it gets more than a roller, we'd expect a pop-up. Omar, trying to get an understanding of what exactly is going on between Baghdad and Erbil, this problem, the restarting of the oil exports out of Kurdistan, now suspended 6+ months. Do you have a deeper understanding of that? Is it a big problem? Is it not? Any thoughts?
I don't actually have any inside information regarding that one, but I will say that this is reflective of the greater instability we're seeing in the region, and the previous red lines and previous stable arrangements are all coming unstuck. We've seen Iraq also challenging the its sea borders with Kuwait regarding various strategic interests, and then the problems between Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Iran regarding the gas and oil fields, and all many arrangements which seemingly were stable, which seemingly were defaulting, are just becoming undone because there's no policeman, and everything's up for grabs. And if you think you are in a position to strong arm an adversary, then this is very much the time, especially with the crisis in Gaza, because diplomatic capital, political capital, military capital is all being deployed elsewhere. So this is a very intelligent time to grab something if you can.
Grab the piece of cake you've been looking at for a while, while nobody's looking. Let's see where that goes. There's been long-standing challenges between Baghdad and Erbil over all things oil and oil revenue and oil income and oil share and so forth. It seems Iraq has found a new balance to be happily exporting more than enough out of the south and within the context of its quota and more. So maybe they're not greatly incentivized to resolve that issue. Brent crude oil trading at above $80, as we said at the beginning of our half hour together. It's still there, just hovering, stuck around that. Nothing much happening. Thank you so much, as always, Robin Mills, CEO of Kamar Energy, Narendra Taneja, India's leading energy expert, and of course, Omar El-Obeidly, Director of Research, Bahrain Center for Strategic International Energy Studies. It's probably the last time we'll have you on this side of the first half of this season on Daily Energy Markets podcast as we break ahead of the festive season. So happy end of year festive season to you all, and look forward to seeing you in the new year as we kick off on January 10th with the World Global Energy Outlook. All the best, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.